You're doing well. I will be ranking all the major Game of Thrones characters because I just rewatched the series and I want to show you who is the best, who's the worst in terms of Game of Thrones social intelligence. We're talking ability to socially uh, master politics, use and leverage the power they have, use and leverage the social skills they have, charisma, persuasion, manipulation, to succeed and further their own goals in the TV show Game of Thrones. Who did it the best, who did it the worst, who did it in the middle. So let's just get started with some of the major characters. We got to start it off with someone who really played the political game of the Game of Thrones, Cersei. Now, first and foremost, I'm not going to put her S class, uh, and there's a reason for that. First and foremost, she was not perfect. I put her as A class because S class means you are perfect. It's like almost godlike, almost divine how perfectly, flawlessly you played it. And that wasn't the case with Cersei. She did a lot of good moves, but she made a lot of mistakes as well. For example, her greatest ambition was to protect her children from harm, and she would do anything to protect her children and further their royal succession. She failed on all three accounts. And a lot of it was because of moves that were initially very well executed, and then she just bombed on it because she wasn't aware and she didn't predict the side effects. In fact, throughout the series from the start, she had a hateful, reactive, emotional tendency that cost her in the long run. For example, first ever season, when Ned Stark declares that he's the king, she just reacts out of rage, tears up the piece of paper, uses her force to bar Ned Stark from becoming king so that her son can become king. While that did show some political strength and power and the importance of not just a piece of paper and honor, but the importance of just leveraging power and circumstance, it ended up backfiring, as did many of her schemes, because then she got a horrible leader. And more importantly, not just that her son was a horrible king that she couldn't control. That was another thing she wasn't perfect at. She couldn't control her son, and her son was terrible. But the bigger backlash from that was the fact that it literally destroyed and started the War of Five Kings, which destroyed and wreaked so much havoc, not just in the north, but in the south. So many people killed, so many kings and queens, and the backlash of that war ended up like harming her a lot and causing a lot of the further heartache that arguably led to the death of her other children. I mean, you look at Marcella. Would she ever have been sent off to Dorne if it wasn't so unsafe? If you look at her final son who died, would he have died, and would that have all taken place if the War of Five Kings didn't take place? So obviously, there's a lot of steps that you can't predict, but I still think that was one of many rash moves that she did out of just emotion that cost her. Going all the way to the end, she made some really strong, impressive moves that, like, I applaud her, and she's like almost S class for. Like, she was able to take back the kingdom from the High Sparrow religious organization when they had a stranglehold over it. But by blowing up the High Sparrow and the Little Sparrows, she didn't predict the effect it would have on her final son, Tommen, which ended up causing him to be so depressed that he killed himself. And then she lost her final son. Very tragic, but I mean, think about it. Like, what do you expect to happen? Like, that was not as unpredictable as the others, because it was very clear that Tommen was very much attached to his wife Marjorie, as well as the whole religious Sparrow organization. So, just physically barring him away from entering and blowing them up, it would obviously have some very negative effects. She just didn't predict how negative it would. So Cersei deserves the first spot, A class, not perfect for some clear reasons, but she played the game very well. I mean, she was so much at a loss when the High Sparrows sees all the power, sees all the political ties, even sent Jaime away to King's Landing, and she was just basically lost all her power, lost everything. She was able to still find a way back. Okay, so that's one of them. Let's move on to another one who played the game. Let's go with probably the only S-class that I may put. I mean, talk about someone who never really made any blatant mistakes. I mean, Cersei made mistakes, but this guy, this eunuch, I mean, he played the game very well almost until that last season, which is not even canon. I mean, that's not derived off the books. And yes, he did get killed and executed by the Mother of Dragons at the end. But, I think everyone can agree that last season was just terribly written, and many characters just seemed out of character in that last season. So if you kind of put that aside, I mean, this guy rarely made any mistakes. I mean, he played the game well. He was never suspected of treachery until he was safe and he'd already escaped. He was able to do so much, manipulate people, get his ears out into the world, learn all this information, get a pulse of all the different kingdoms and what things are going on. He got revenge on the spellcaster who tortured him and cut off his balls as a kid. And then, when the time was right, he pursued his goals, which is to further the good of the realm, and that ultimately meant moving to Daenerys' side, and he executed that wonderfully. He got Tyrion there just like he wanted. I think he managed to accomplish a lot, almost everything he wanted, but of course he was not perfect. He didn't have unlimited power. He was only someone who at best could be maybe the hand of the king, not the king himself, because he was not highborn. He didn't have the right blood, but he also had a lot of self-awareness. He acknowledged that. He knew he could never do that, so he made the right moves to improve that. And I think the only blemishes were the one thing where at the end he just really didn't have the ability that it ended up being that last season where it was just got really weird, and it almost felt like the writers just wanted to kill someone off. So they said, okay, this guy obviously has the good of the kingdom in his realm, and it seemed like it was going well. If Daenerys seemed to be the most just, rightful, fair ruler out there, much better than cruel Cersei, and yet it was almost as if in the last season the writers decided, oh, let's make her Daenerys into more of a villain, and so just out of the blue, Daenerys is like, oh, you get executed, you betrayed me, and it wasn't even really a betrayal. It was like a small thing. So that last season just got weird, but other than that, I don't think he had many blemishes. I think there were times where he just did not have enough power or ability to turn things in a way that he wanted, and so especially some of the seasons when he was with the Lannisters, it got very cruel and upsetting. He clearly did not like who was king, and that spoiled Joffrey. That was just very much a lot of atrocities, but there were times where he had his hands tied. He could only do so much. So I think that was one of the only blemishes. And yes, he foresaw a lot of things, but he couldn't make it happen. He wasn't you can't always persuade people to do everything you want. And I think the one thing he saw ahead of time was when basically Tyrion's lover slash whore, he knew was going to be a weakness, a vulnerability for Tyrion. And later on it was a big vulnerability. And so he tried to convince her to sail away. But Shay, being stupid and ignorant, chose not to. And so that's, I think, the only blemish with this guy, Varys. So let's move on to one of my favorite characters, Tyrion. You know, I'm going to put him as, I'm going to put him, should I put him as S or A class? Honestly, he was not perfect either. I'm going to put him as A class. He's very close to S class, but despite how smart and incredible he is, he's hovering on S and A class for me because I think because of his traumatized childhood, he did act emotionally and reactive in certain circumstances. The biggest being, he could have gone when he was escaping from the Lannister castle. He could have gone straight to Varys instead because of his emotions and his years of childhood abuse by his father Tywin. He ended up killing Shay and Tywin, which was a huge spiral and definitely not planned. And of course that caused a lot of disruptive behavior. And another instance, when he was traveling to meet Daenerys, he also got emotional and he couldn't control himself, and he ended up saying, despite Varys's pleas, hey, I want to go explore the city, I want to sleep around, drink some beer. And Varys is like, it's too dangerous. If anyone recognizes you, they will kill you. There's a huge bounty on your head. He didn't listen, and I understand, it's human nature. He was cooped up in a cart for hours, maybe days, and so I still felt like he could have just taken a walk around nature. He didn't have to go into the city. And sure enough, what happened? Jorah Mormont, I think his name is, whatever his name is, he noticed Tyrion and he got kidnapped. Even before that, I think, but like if you move it back in time, I think he played the King's Hand of the King game, probably the best out of anyone out there. I mean, the moves he made to sift out some of the people who were lying or cheating or telling people something behind his back was genius. He made a lot of genius moves. As a refresher, he told each of the other people on the council different stories about his plan, and he told each of them, you must not tell anyone. And by doing that, by learning which story leaked, he figured out who was actually the person who was leaking the stories. And that way he was able to root out some of the treachery, the rats that led to previous hands of the king dying. So for all of that, all of his intelligence and everything, I think he is borderline S class. I might even do something like this. I might put Varys at S plus and then Tyrion as S, simply because I think Tyrion deserves it to an extent, but also he made some emotionally reactive moves. I mean, he was not good at always controlling his temper, his frustration when he got disrespected by the king, Joffrey. And that ultimately cost him a lot of times, even towards the very end when Joffrey got poisoned. If you rewatch that scene, if Tyrion had just, restrained himself a bit more and said, hey, you are definitely right, King, let's carry on, then it wouldn't have led into this, very bitter battle and vicious battle, which would have implicated Tyrion as the killer of Joffrey at the end. And sure enough, he got framed and everyone thought it was him. and he could have potentially avoided that. Now, I'm not saying I would have done better or anyone would have done better. It's human nature. I mean, Joffrey was horrible, but once again, we are judging people on how flawlessly they play the Game of Thrones, so the standard is very high. Okay, so let's go on to the next one here. Let's go ahead and say this guy. I'm going to put him at a solid B. So I think his name's Renly Baratheon, and he was probably one of the best rulers out there. Kind, courteous, respectful to Caitlyn Stark, the rest of the team. He was just a very respectful guy, even when Catelyn was a bit rough to him. Him being such a big ruler, he didn't have to be, and yet he gave a very warm personality. Now, his death wasn't really caused by Game of Thrones politics. It was done by blood magic, so we can't fault that against him. But I think in terms of politics and figuring things out, I just felt like he was, nothing impressive, middle of the road, kind of forgettable in a sense. He was a bit stubborn. He could have tried to negotiate with Stannis or figure something out, but instead he was just like, I'm going to kill my brother's army. And, to his credit, he told Catelyn that he had known his brother for years, and his brother Stannis is incredibly stubborn, and there would have been no chance of negotiation. But, I just felt like ultimately, even if he wasn't killed by blood magic, it would have just ended in not the best way. I mean, I felt like, one of your two armies, if not both of them, are going to get decimated by this battle. And then all the other kings, you have, Joffrey, and then people in the north, the Boltons, the Ironborn, who will just swoop in and kill off the rest and take the throne. So I just felt like the whole prospect of having a war that early just didn't make much sense to me. So I didn't see him as anything spectacular in terms of his Game of Thrones play. Okay, Olenna Tyrell. I'm going to put her as A-class as well. Now, we're not just talking charisma, because we're not just measuring charisma because she had some of the best charisma. She was the most snarky, quick-witted, tart-tongued, honest, sometimes brutally honest, yet charming people in the whole show. I loved her, but we're not just measuring her on that. We're measuring her on overall ability to play the Game of Thrones, use social intelligence, use her power, her resources to success. Now, she played the game very, very well. I would argue potentially better than a lot of people. And yet, I think she still failed to succeed many times. Sometimes she succeeded beautifully. She killed Joffrey. No one even suspected her. It was brilliant. She helped her daughter Marjorie with all these, little bits of guidance, and they together manipulated and kind of influenced Joffrey, something that Cersei was unable to do. And she was able to throw her resources, her power, oftentimes, and use her charisma and communication to oftentimes get what she wants. Sometimes through threats, but she often got what she wanted. An example being when, she would throw out, the Tyrells are supplying all the food, the water, the resources to the kingdom. If you don't do this, I'm going to take that away. And that often got her way many times. But, there are many times where she still failed. I mean, think about it. When the Sparrows took over and basically enslaved and imprisoned and tortured her daughter and her grandson and her son, and basically the final bloodline to the Tyrells for the throne were just basically tortured and decimated. She did everything she could and she failed. She tried to use her political resources, her communication with the High Sparrow, and all of that. And ultimately, she couldn't fix anything. Marjorie was still in prison, tortured, and so was her brother. And she ended up just giving up and moving away. And so that was very sad. It was terrible. And then they died, and because Cersei killed them. So it was like she didn't play a lot of things well, but I think she played many things very well. She had a strong allegiance, communication ability with many people, Tywin Lannister, and various others. And she was in a very good position. They played the game well. Even when she talked about her previous life when she was young, she gave a lot of stories where she played the game very well. Where apparently the person she wanted to marry was betrothed to another, and she was betrothed to someone that wasn't interesting. So she used her seduction and her ability to convince, to wed the man she wanted. And so she was very good. She said her Marjorie was even better. And yet, despite all of that power and ability, she was unable to prevent her children from dying. And then on top of that, she did end up losing a battle and being poisoned herself by Jaime. So, she put up a very good fight. For her to live that long, as she mentioned throughout the series, she played the game very, very well. When most of her rivals had died, she had outlived many of them. So, mad respect to her, but I think, she wasn't perfect. She made a lot of mistakes in a way, or at least she failed to get everything she wanted. And at the end, it was really just about survival. And I mean, not survival, revenge. So in the last season, it was really just about her allying with the Dornish people and Varys to seek revenge on Cersei, because Cersei had decimated her family. And even then, was she even that successful? No. And that's more warfare than politics, but nonetheless. All right. Okay, so King Robert's barely in it other than the first season, but I'm actually going to put him as a B. Now, why not a C? Why is Robert so high? He wasn't that great. He was just a man that was referenced as, a great fighter, battler, never lost any battles except for one, and spent almost 2 decades ruling the kingdom, but spent most of it whoring around, committing adultery and fathering dozens of children, to Cersei's detriment. Now, once again, another nod to Cersei's ability. She was the one who finally killed her husband as revenge. So, once again, she got her way, and, she ended up being queen, although that's because her children died. But here's the thing. The reason I'm putting Robert as high as a B, even though you might think he deserves lower, is because Robert still managed to rule all of the kingdoms, including the North, for 16 years. Now keep in mind, the entire show has been all these kings trying to rule, and if they do rule, some of them barely last 2 weeks, a month, a few months, a year and a half. The King of North has switched and swapped from Ned to Robb to, the Ironborn for a short bit, and then the Boltons got it, but then I guess Jon Snow got it back. So it's hard to maintain a kingdom. And maybe it was a time of peace and summer or whatnot, but still, for him to have managed it for that long, I mean, you have to give some credit to the guy. He may not have been the most politically savvy or any type of political savviness, but for him to last that long, he must have done some things right. Okay, here's a fun one. Ned Stark, I'm not going to put him as F or absolute garbage. In fact, I think I'm going to put him as a C here. Now, you might be like, why aren't you putting him as F or D? Here's the thing. Once again, Ned Stark was able to rule for a very long period of time. You have to give him credit. yes, he was dumb for being honorable. And in this world, this game, this more medieval time, honor is not so much important as backstabbing, betrayal, forcing your power, and all this stuff. And yet, he was able to raise and bring out and gain loyalty and allegiance from all these different houses of the north, many of them who ended up coming back to follow the Starks at the end of the day by season 7. So a lot of them really came back to him, and part of that was due to his honor, his reliability, his ability to lead. Okay, I'll give him a D because I think throughout the show he was really referenced as not that great. But I'll move it to a C because think about it. His ability to rule and have all these and raise all these good children, many of them who ended up being pretty good leaders and rulers, conquerors, assassins, and for him to foster and know how Sansa was different from Arya and to let that blossom rather than stifle it. I thought he was a good father, good person who kind of built this whole family and dynasty. And even though the Boltons, Walter Frey, the Lannisters, did everything in their power to root out and stamp out all Starks, despite all that, Sansa still survived and dominated. Jon still survived. Arya survived and dominated. And so when you put it all together, the Starks are hard to stomp out. And that's for a reason. He did a pretty good job, even though maybe the politics of it was not his strong suit. He did enough to last and help his family last in the Game of Thrones. Jaime Lannister. I am going to actually put Jaime. Go put Jaime up here. And actually, I think I'm going to move this Baratheon down here. Because now that I think about it, probably wasn't that good compared to Jaime. Jaime was, he was not perfect. I think, especially in the first few seasons, he definitely came off as this bit of a slightly spoiled brat because of how handsome he was and how he could just name his father and use his gold and power and get what he wanted. But after his hand got chopped off, he kind of got more humbled. He got more socially savvy, and he used that in various instances. You found out he had many layers. He wasn't just this dumb, pretty boy. He had trauma from killing the previous Targaryen king, which he showcased. So essentially, he was able to really persuade, communicate, and get some decent things done. He was able to outlast most people and survive all 7 seasons. That's saying something. He endured a siege. He endured captivity. And I mean, you got to think about it. This guy, actually, I'm honestly going to move him up to an A because this guy was able to finagle his way out of a war as the main hostage with his silver tongue by convincing Caitlyn Stark that, oh yeah, if you free me, I'll free your sisters. And did he ever actually fulfill that? I guess he tried, but he didn't really try that hard. And really, I think he did kind of help aid in the protection of Sansa Stark. But other than that, he never found Arya. And, it really wasn't... He didn't do much to influence Sansa getting back to Winterfell. That just happened naturally. And then Arya, he had no influence on. So he basically, told a lie. And he really had very few cards to play. And basically tricked Caitlyn Stark, and Caitlyn Stark done goofed, and effectively almost lost the war for them in that sense by giving away one of their main hostages, causing a huge lapse in morale, and it was a huge mess. And for you to persuade someone to do that and basically trick them and do a 180 and not even deliver or not even plan on delivering that, I think it was brilliant. So I think he had a lot of great plays. All right, Marjorie Tyrell, I think she's one of my favorite characters, because for one, she's not evil and horrendous. She had a good heart, but I think she played the game very well, to a point where it was very impressive. She had a lot of charisma and ability. I think the issue came in kind of in the later seasons. Like at first, it seemed like she was like AAA threat, one of the most beautiful, like probably the most beautiful in the show. And then second, she had this charming ability, and she was able to charm Joffrey, who no one could influence or control other than maybe Tywin Lannister a bit. And she was able to convince and persuade and manipulate Joffrey into becoming better and better and to do things the way she wanted, such as to give the food from the wedding feast to the homeless, although Cersei did end up scrapping that at the end. But for her to do that and influence the king and cause that was incredible when no one else could do that. And she also charmed and was able to get her way, and her goal was always to be the biggest queen, which she achieved. I think, nodding back to Olenna Tyrell, I think one mistake Olenna made was she killed Joffrey. I mean, I think Marjorie was manipulating Joffrey very well, and Olenna was just like, I don't want you to marry that monster. I'll have, you can do the same with Tommen. And while that was happening as well, Marjorie was able to manipulate and influence Tommen to do what she wanted. I think Cersei saw that. She saw it both times, but I think in the second time, she really got into it, and then she involved the High Sparrow. So it's kind of like a back and forth game between them, with Cersei being such a hateful person and just jealous and angry of the influence that Marjorie had. And this whole Sparrow situation backfire. It cost Cersei her children. It cost Marjorie her life, her brother's life, and like a lot more. Like even if they survived, the Sparrows took everything from them. Like Marjorie lost her brother, and since her brother basically renounced the Tyrell name, the kingdom, the royal blood, all the privileges, and vowed to never marry or father children because of the religious Sparrow cult. So it's a huge mess, but essentially, both of them never succeeded, Cersei or Marjorie, completely. And Cersei was one of the people who was never charmed by Marjorie. From the get-go, she saw right through it, and there was like a very hateful scene where Marjorie was like looped her arm and was like, let's be friends. And Cersei was like, if you ever touch me again, I'll kill you. You are like something like that, like, I don't like you type of thing. And so while Marjorie was A-class, she was not flawless. All right. Let's choose another one. Okay, so this guy, I would say he was actually B-class. Now, he never really wanted much, so, he never really got anywhere, but he never died. He never got killed. He never got backstabbed, when so many other people in the series got killed, executed, backstabbed, when there's a change of power or a change of opinion. And, case in point, the other Grand Maester of the Lannister Kingdom was literally had his body killed by Cersei's order and executed by this guy. So, this guy was always able to kind of hang in there, and he did Cersei's bidding, but, Cersei basically almost trusts no one. So for him to last that long when Cersei's, killing people, backstabbing people, killing her own subordinates left and right when there's any sense of distrust, I mean, it's pretty darn good for him to last that long. And I think he essentially did it by having valuable skills. In this case, it was his ability to manufacture and use wildfire, which is an incredibly powerful explosive ability, and then also his ability to resurrect and heal the mountain, which was another huge asset to Cersei, and then his just general ability to do whatever Cersei wants, no matter how cruel or distasteful. And so he did a lot of her dirty bidding, killing people that were previous servants or allies of Cersei when they took a turn or fell out of grace with Cersei. So he kind of stayed a bit under the radar, but just by always being loyal, he was able to hang in there for a while. Okay, one of my favorite actors, I'm going to put him as B class. So this guy got killed by the mountain, and I forgot his name, but he's Dornish, and I think this guy was very charismatic. He had a lot of charismatic scenes, and I think a lot of people generally had a relatively good vibe when they were around him. But you got to understand the general context of his whole story arc and why he was there and the words coming out of his mouth. This guy was repeatedly saying, sometimes with a smile and with a lot of charm, but saying that he's only in the Lannister kingdom to essentially avenge his sister. And essentially he's saying, I am going to avenge and kill the Lannisters who murdered and raped my sister. Not just the mountain, but anyone associated with that. In fact, one of the main scenes he's in before he's killed is at the wedding of Joffrey with Marjorie. And the scene he has in that is actually very tense. He literally goes up to Tywin and Cersei and just, makes all these backhanded, veiled insults at them, saying how distasteful it is and how, terrible the people of Lannisters are, just constantly reminding them how they killed and raped his sister and how he wants revenge. So in terms of playing the Game of Thrones, I mean, I thought he just did an average job overall. He went there, he was in the whorehouses a lot, and then he talked a lot. He was very charismatic in certain ways, but he was always just seeking a way to find out how he could avenge his sisters. And so he found one way, but he got overconfident and died because of it. So I just felt it was just too blatant, and by never hiding your intentions like that, you have a very straightforward, simple-minded approach. The more sophisticated, smart people like Littlefinger are going to exploit that, and that's why I think, if he really played this game long, like, they would know his intentions, and Cersei would be like, let's assassinate this guy. Like, I don't want him around. He clearly is only here to kill us. So I felt that to be rather bad. Now, the reason I still put him so high B is because of his charm and ability. I mean, Tywin literally went up to him and after Joffrey died, and he's like, you're here. I know you want to avenge the Lannisters, and I know you studied poison, and you're a master of poison. So why shouldn't I say you killed Joffrey? And he essentially used a good deal of charm, but also I think Tywin used his logic. And essentially they resolved that it wasn't him that killed Joffrey, and Tywin ended up appointing him to be one of the judges to the trial. So I think without the charm he had there, which I did admire, and his ability to do that, he could have ended up in a different situation. I just felt he was generally pretty charismatic, and he could have easily been thrown in jail and just executed anyways, which is like essentially what like a classic Ned Stark death situation. So without that bit of charm, I felt like, and Tywin's logic, he could have died. And I just felt like, he wasn't really smart about it and just broadcasting his intentions like that, because now he's implicated for Joffrey's death. Okay, Joffrey's ability to play the Game of Thrones, I'm going to put him as an F. Like, he had no social intelligence. It was purely through his sheer power of ruling that he got his way, but he was a spoiled brat. And quite honestly, Cersei kind of like managed some of the social politics behind the scenes. And ultimately, his belligerent, terrible behavior, his foul behavior, caused him to have a lot of enemies who ultimately led to him getting poisoned. So, I think he had a lot of power, but he didn't play the game well. It was just a matter of time before he got assassinated. Caitlyn Stark, I'm actually going to put her at a D here. I thought she played the game terribly. I think the one point of credit she did have was she advised Robb on some warfare, and she was right, and Robb was wrong. Robb disobeyed her, and it cost him in the war, which he later brought up and apologized, and then Robb later said, "Hey, I'm going to listen to you now." Other than that, she made some terrible choices. She kept pushing with the Walder Frey thing, even though it just got worse and worse. And honestly, I'll put her at a C, because I think she was sensing how Walder Frey would behave, and Robb was just rather too blind to it to really even notice. And Robb just kept pushing because they were running out of men and choices. But she made that terrible mistake with the whole releasing Jaime thing, and that was just a big mess. So that's what I gotta put her at. Okay. I'm gonna put this guy, I think his name's Jorah the Andal, as a C as well. I found him to be rather, run of the mill. He did have some good moves here and there. I think his ability to kind of help the queen and then bring back allegiance after he was cast out as a traitor, and his ability to win over the queen was great. But he simply just served as a supporting character, supporting soldier, and he made some good moves, made some good guidance to the queen, but never really amounted to much in that sense of accumulating power or playing that Game of Thrones to a large extent. Once again, we're not measuring how good of a person he was, how awesome he was, and how great, because quite frankly, I did like him for a lot of those things, but really wasn't that. Okay, this guy, he was a very small side character with the Hound. He led this small village, used to be a terrible person, but then he was reformed. Long story short, I'm putting him as absolute garbage, because the Hound was right. They had a few, bandits come into the village, and he was like, "Oh, we don't have to worry about these guys." And the Hound is like, "You do. You have steel, you have women, you have food. They're gonna rape and kill you." And he was like, "Oh, don't worry about it." Sure enough, the town gets murdered and ransacked and killed, and then he hangs himself. So not being preemptive and seeing that cost him and the whole town their life. All right, Jon Snow. Jon Snow, I'm actually going to put as a B. Some people love him as a character. It's not about how lovable and awesome and loyal of a character he is. Did he play the Game of Thrones the best? No, he did a lot of the right things, very similar to Ned Stark. but that ultimately got him stabbed like 5 times. He didn't. He noticed that people didn't like it, and he still made the right move, but he wasn't preemptive enough as some of the other characters would have been, and in sensing, okay, where does that lead? Oh, they're going to be so aggravated that they're going to kill me. So he did a lot of good work in terms of being able to, amass armies, bring loyalty, charisma, be such a good person that a lot of people followed him. But in the actual political play of the Game of Thrones, he was never that excellent at it. At least the social game, it was more just him being that good person, that good loyal person, good leader, making generally good calls, having the right blood, that people rallied around him. And ultimately, I think, that and that higher purpose of defeating the Night King caused people to continue to serve him and rally around him. So I think maybe I could put him as A class for now, but yeah, I think that was that. Okay, who else? Arya Stark. Arya Stark, I'm going to put as S. I mean, this time it's an exception because it wasn't as much social skill or social ability in terms of political warfare, but she did have social tact various times. The time when she masqueraded as a regular northern-born girl and served Tywin tea every day and wine and got to listen in. I mean, that was very smart of her to make those lies on the fly. And throughout the series, she was so quick on her feet by being socially intelligent and making the right lies to save her skin or others. Remember the time when they were hunting for Robert's bastard and they came onto camp with him and Arya, and then Arya lied and said, "Oh, you already killed the bastard. That was his favorite helmet." That saved him. She made up a lie on the spot that saved him. If she had been like Ned Stark and just told the truth, she would have been dead. And so she leveraged things constantly. When she met the assassin, she leveraged that. She was like, teach me how to be an assassin. She leveraged that skill. She made her own path. She quit the assassin corporation. She sailed back to Westeros, got revenge on Walder Frey and a lot of the others. She made it happen. She killed the Night King. I mean, she never wanted to be king or queen, but she played the Game of Thrones in a great way, killing off some of the major influencers and movers and getting the revenge she wanted. Okay, I'm going to actually put this wildling as a B. Now, why is that? Actually, I'll put her as a C. Well, it's because she was pretty savvy. She was able to seduce Theon and then get what she wanted, which was to get Bran out of Winterfell. But then she failed in the sense that she tried to do the same with Ramsay Bolton and ultimately ended up really not doing that well because Ramsay didn't have the same intentions, didn't have the same sexual feeling, and saw through her. So her inability to read people that well and just assume all men were the same cost her. And then she really never had much aspirations or the right blood or power or ability to leverage power. She didn't want to. She just wanted to be her little wildling self. So she didn't really amount to that much. All right, Daenerys. I'm going to put her as a B. I mean, here's the thing. I'll put her as B/A. Here's the thing. She never was able or had a talent to play the game the same as the people of Westeros did. She was more about just straight up conquering, whereas back in Westeros with Cersei, it was constantly political games, social games, talking to this one person, saying something else, lying, cheating. Her, it was a lot of just, I'm going to use my dragons. I'm going to use my ability to not be burned, to kill the cow Dragos, to kill the cows, to burn, the slavers, to burn the guy who sold her the Unsullied army. So it was really just about leveraging her force. And I don't think that deserves a higher grade in terms of the grand scheme of the Game of Thrones ability, which I think really leverages a lot of social tact and social ability as well. So, that's why I put her where she did. All right. Now, where is Littlefinger? Because I want to rate him right now. Fortunately, I do not see Littlefinger here. Littlefinger is here. I'm going to put him as S-Class. Now, Littlefinger is S-Class until maybe season 6, season 7, where it's not canon, it diverges from the book. Because I think then he falls to like B or C class, to be honest. But, I think in general, up until that point, he played the game brilliantly, almost like Varys, like flawlessly. No one even accused him or considered that he was the one who poisoned Joffrey, when he was. He disappeared, he had an alibi. He was someone who doesn't reveal his intentions blatantly, unlike some of the people like, this Dornish guy. And by doing that, he was very much able to get away with things because he knew that the guy with no motivation is never pointed to as the culprit. And so he played the game beautifully and was able. This was a guy who really thought in chess moves. He thought, I'm going to marry this person off to this person. I'm going to kill this person, and so on and so forth, because he wanted to be on the Iron Throne eventually. And he thought intergenerational. I think he drops to about a C in season 7, season 6, because he makes some very blatant moves that were very erroneous, that cost him, that were kind of out of character. I mean, first off, selling Sansa off to the Boltons, knowing that, it's just not going to end well. He knew that the Boltons were terrible, horrible people who had murdered the Starks, and yet you really didn't think 1-2 steps ahead. Of course, Sansa's going to be horrified with it. And then, season 6, 7, he still tries to kiss and make it up to Sansa, and Sansa's clearly not having it. I don't think Littlefinger of the first few seasons would have done that, because it would have just been out of character for him and clearly not the right move to make. Because step 1, you marry her off, okay, sure, but then step 2, she's going to be real pissed at you because Ramsay Bolton treated her horribly, raped her, beat her, all this terrible stuff, and he had very little ability to recuperate through that. So the actor was perfect, but I just think the script took a nosedive because the HBO writers, once it diverged from the book. So I'm gonna rate Littlefinger S, by somewhat ignoring the last season and a half, because otherwise I think he played it brilliantly. I mean, from the start, backstabbing Ned all the way to the end, he really never had any issue until, I guess, the whole thing with the High Sparrow. That was the one part where it did get a little tricky. He could only do so little. Stannis Baratheon, I think I'm going to give him a B. He made some very good warfare moves. He was more of a warfare leader, but he also had some decent judgment, but also some bad judgment. The bad judgment was, following this horrific religious organization, burning people at the stake. Clearly, all those sacrifices and stuff ended up not even paying off. If you count the final battle and burning his daughter alive, and all of that failing to win the war for him and getting him killed. But he made some really good decisions, especially when he rode to the north to try and recruit the wildling army, and you could tell that he was a good leader who made quick decisions, and his exchanges with Jon Snow and his decisions and ability to see the leadership potential in Jon Snow, you could tell he was a good leader, a good ruler in general, at least compared to Joffrey. But ultimately, his downfall was, essentially kind of overcommitting. Like, he knew he was going to lose the war. He half his army deserted him. He was very down on numbers, but just because he just felt like this was his last chance, because winter was going to come and then it would be there for years and he wouldn't be able to mobilize his army, he was just like, I got to do it now. Which, just because it's your last chance doesn't mean you plunge into something that is clearly going to be close to unwinnable. So I thought that was rather dumb. Alright, this Ironborn girl, I'm going to give her a B2 because she made some decent moves. She was a very good leader. She led her troops, despite being a woman and all the biases back then. A lot of her men had such loyalty and honor and trust for her, much more than Theon was able to command. Unfortunately, she failed to take the throne when Euron Greyjoy showed up. So, yeah, I'm going to put Euron as a C because Euron was a terrible dick, very ruthless, horrible person, and just had a clear, confident, strong masculine presence and the right blood. And through that, he was, able, and some experience, he traveled the world. He was able to rally some charisma. But, ultimately, Euron, I thought he was all right, not great. Did manage to build an incredible fleet and do some great damage, but ultimately I felt like he ended up being nothing more than like a lackey, like a side character, like a second in command to some other greater power that was like his ploy, whether that was for Daenerys or Cersei. I mean, he always kind of ended up being like a second fiddle in a way and never really, I don't know, he did a good job, but he was rather not that great compared to others in the social aspect of the game. And that's why this Ironborn girl was able to kind of succeed a little bit, because she was smart enough to go to Daenerys first, make her pitch, which Daenerys accepted before Euron could even get there. Alright, Ramsay Bolton, I'm also going to put as a C as well. And because of that, I think I'm keep the assesses. But yeah, Ramsay Bolton, extremely cruel psychopath character, didn't care about the suffering of others, loved to torture people, and quite frankly was a very good warfare tactician. He was able to basically outwit and pulled on Jon Snow's emotions in the Battle of the Bastards, and he kind of won out until those reinforcements came at the end, which was in no part due to Jon. And so ultimately, while he did have good warfare tact and he had some good ability, I mean, he became the Lord by killing his father. So I'm actually going to put him a bit above because he did play the game well and was able to get to a certain level. But I think his flaw was just his hateful ability and his sheer default setting to skin people, torture people, flay people, and send these very absolutionist letters of like, hey, Jon Snow, I'm going to murder you and everyone else and all this stuff unless you surrender. Like, if he had not done that, maybe they would have avoided a war. But like, he has a tendency to just send out these horrific letters and all this terrible stuff. So in that sense, I'm going to leave him as a B. Sansa Stark, I think first few seasons she was like a D or even an F, because she just wanted to be that pretty lady, and she just was that. But then she got smarter. She realized, I gotta say these things. I gotta side with the side in power. She moved up to like a C and then a B. Some people say she's like S class. I never really thought so. I never thought she was really ever that good. I put her as a B. I think she's learned some things from Littlefinger, and especially after her aunt got flung into the moon hole, she started to make her own lies, play Littlefinger's game, and then she started to move up a bit. She kind of helped win the Battle of the Bastards by bringing in those reinforcements. But once again, you got to credit Littlefinger for really seeding that idea in her mind. So she's a B to me. Nothing really that great. But she had some ability to rally the troops. All right, the Mountain. Great strong man in real life, by the way. I'm going to put the Mountain as D. No real strong social ability, but just the sheer value of his physical strength kept him from dying. People saw his value, so they did what they could to keep him alive. Okay, this guy, he survived the Red Wedding, but he was essentially betrayed and married off, even though he didn't want to further the war efforts. D, he did what he could, but ultimately ended up, not really doing that well. Had some more social tact than Joffrey, though. I'm going to put her as a C. She just kind of made her way and did what she could, which was offered her strength as a fighter. And through that and her loyalty and commitment, people saw her valuable, so she, stuck along. This guy I'm going to put as a D. He was Robert's bastard, and clearly a terrible at Game of Thrones. He was just captured and seduced and really just did what they wanted by Melisandre, and really had not that much tact or ability. He just essentially just floated around trying to survive for the most part. Wasn't that bad. He was probably average at best in terms of Game of Thrones ability and gameplay there. Enough to survive and get through, which is honorable because people were out to kill him, and there was a bounty on his head, and Joffrey wanted to execute all bastards, but never really went far. Melisandre is an A, and once again, it's not just Melisandre, but the High Sparrow as well. Religion just plays such a strong, powerful ability to, because you can always just point back to the unknown and mystery and belief, and she was able to just weave her web of lies so much that you can believe her. And because there's this whole realm of just magic and uncertainty and belief, you never needed scientific evidence or proof. You can always just point back to something that's intangible, and by that you always have this fallback. And she was really able to persuade, mostly Stannis, but others as well, a little bit of Jon Snow and others afterwards with her spells and ability, and that just constantly just guided her through and kept her alive, and basically made Stannis oftentimes do what she wanted. So she was always like, oh, you didn't do this. If you had just given more faith, or, oh, you need more commitment. You have to commit yourself. She got Stannis through all sorts of terrible things because he didn't believe or commit enough, including adultery and burning his children. What an ability to just influence some of the big players, the big masters. Terrible person. I mean, I think what she did was wrong, but in terms of measuring her ability to play the Game of Thrones, she did well. In terms of immorality, I mean, terrible person. Ability to play Game of Thrones, I'm going to give her an F2. She was Sansa's aunt. She basically let Littlefinger manipulate the heck out of her, and because she thought Littlefinger loved her, she was willing to poison her husband, family members, parents, whatever Littlefinger wanted. So, I mean, arguably even worse than Joffrey. Like, terrible ability to play that game. And she got herself killed by Littlefinger at the end. I mean, just completely bad. This person I actually put as a C. I mean, he was able to bed Daenerys and convince Daenerys to accept him and kind of lead and join that whole revolution that Daenerys was following. So not bad. This Dornish kid, pretty bad. Very naive, innocent guy. Ended up just getting destroyed by some of the other Dornish people. He ended up being betrayed and killed because of his just sheer naivete about the greater context and political scenes. He was just didn't seem to care about that. Just wanted to like have fun and enjoy life. That cost him, I think. I'm going to give her a D. I thought she played the game pretty terribly. Yes, she did get revenge by killing Marcella, but her sheer nearsightedness of just constantly thinking revenge, because they raped and killed one of her relatives, and then her husband got killed, which, by the way, was a more rightful kill because it was a fair death by combat, or battle by combat, trial by combat situation. But her just sheer, focus on revenge cost her a lot. I mean, she ultimately ended up getting captured by Cersei and tortured, and now she gets to see her children get tortured in front of her too. I mean, for what? Like, trying to ruin Cersei? Like, you didn't think that by killing Cersei's daughter, it would just end and then to be tit for tat? No. It would start a whole war, just as the King of Dorne warned her, and it would have just been back and forth. Now Cersei wants revenge. She didn't really see into the future, and sure enough, Cersei wanted revenge for her killing Marcella. It doesn't work like that in the Game of Thrones. It's not, people's not going to be like, oh, I did rape and kill one of your relatives, and then another one got killed as well, so I guess we're even now since you killed my daughter. No, they're just going to be like, you killed my daughter, I want revenge. They just kind of forget about the previous things that happened. It's human nature. They just very short-term memory focused. It's not about like some accounting ledger, like, oh yeah, you killed Marcella, we're good to go. I'm not going to seek revenge now because I wronged you in the past. Not Cersei, no. Cersei's not like that. So I'm going to put this guy here because I think it's the same dude, but he has long hair. I don't know why. They may have accidentally added two people. Bran, I'm just going to put like at a D level. Honestly, like, he really didn't influence the Game of Thrones much at all. And for all his future stories, future seeing and past seeking ability, I mean, he really didn't do much. I mean, yeah, they banded together and killed Littlefinger, but that's not canon, and that didn't even really make sense. I mean, that last season made Littlefinger look like he had no idea what was going on, that he was just like following along. It really like nerfed Littlefinger and made him seem like he was just like a fool. And I don't know if Bran did much else other than that. I mean, they really kind of made it anticlimactic with what Bran could do. Okay, this guy I'm going to put as a C. So he was one of the merchants in, I think, one of the cities that Daenerys visited early. And he went from like broke beggar on the streets to one of the richest through a game of like lies and deceit. Essentially like claiming he was much richer than he was. And through those lies, he made it up to the top. Ultimately, those lies cost him. So, it was kind of a short-sighted story, but, I think he did a decent job making it that far, but ultimately I felt like it kind of was lacking in ability. This guy I'm going to put as a D as well. I mean, he really just got betrayed and killed by, his relatives, and he should have saw it coming. He saw the resentment and distaste around him for, his family members dying. And sure, I believed that his intent and his reasoning was just and right. He didn't want to start a giant war, and Oberyn had died fairly in a trial by combat. But nonetheless, it's not just about fairness and justice, as I keep repeating. In the Game of Thrones, it's also about like, okay, what's human nature? What are your friends, relatives, what are the people around with power going to think? And in this case, they ultimately betrayed him and stabbed him multiple times because they just had such distaste that no revenge being sought at for, the people of Dorne dying, and the royal people of Dorne dying. And sure, it was not right to start a war just because of that, but by doing nothing still, that cost him. Theon Greyjoy, I'm going to put as probably a F. I mean, he played the game very poorly. He went to Ironborn thinking that he could just like rally the troops, completely got smacked in the face there, told like he was worth nothing. Ultimately became someone who was just trying to please his dad. So then he decided to invade Winterfell, which wasn't even his decision. It was like one of the other Ironborns trying to manipulate him. And he tried to do that to please his dad. His dad wasn't pleased. He only held it for a while, betrayed some of the people he grew up with, and then, ended up just getting tortured by the Boltons. And then, his self-esteem and everything just slowly crumbled. And I can go on and on about him, but he played the game terribly. Here's the Mountain again, so I'm going to put him next to this guy. Samwell Tarly, I'm going to put him as a C for ability to play the Game of Thrones. I think his ability, honestly, I'll put him as a D, honestly. He never really amounted to much with physical combat, but he did provide some value with his intelligence and his maester ability. There was one good moment where he did rally to Jon Snow's side, and he was the one who nominated and did a pretty darn good speech to pitch why Jon Snow should be Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Other than that, I think the only other major striking, impactful move he made was, killing a Night Walker, relaying how to kill Night Walkers to the other Night's Watch, and then proposing to Jon to become a maester and travel south, which ultimately ended with him finding out more information to defeat the Night King and his army. In terms of story, he played a great supporting character role, was Jon's maybe only friend for a while, and really lovable guy. But in terms of general gameplay ability of social warfare, ability to accumulate power and strength using social tact and power in the Game of Thrones, not so good. So this guy in the Night's Watch, I actually thought was, once again, terrible person. Like, I can't say I would really like to side by him. I always sided with Jon, and he was kind of put out to be the villain. But really, when you think about it, he just wanted to be loyal to the Night's Watch way for thousands of years, which was to guard the wall against wildlings. I'm putting him as a C because his ability to rally a lot of the Night's Watch, hold a certain level of leadership and power was strong, and ultimately led to the assassination of Jon Snow. At the same time, I think his ability to hide his feelings and stuff was actually rather, I would say, I actually put it below Sam, because his ability to hide his family. Actually, I put them both together here because he was okay, but he couldn't hide his emotions well and hide his intention and motives. Like, he was clearly very bitter, and he showed it when he wasn't elected Lord Commander. So I didn't think he had much exceptional gameplay. I'm gonna put him at a yeah, I'll put him as a C. C/D. Walder Frey. I'll put Walder Frey as a B, actually. I mean, one of the pivotal players, but once again, a pawn in the game. It was really Tywin who did that and orchestrated that, but he executed, and for such a plot twist, a betrayal of the Starks by the Lannisters through Walder Frey, very impressive thing to pull it off successfully, to succeed in that way. But once again, like, he was set up for death. I mean, right after the wedding, there's constant references of how, you know, if you kill guests, you know, the gods will have you. So exceptional move in that one place, and pretty good social ability to play it off. I mean, he made some moves to make it seem like, you know, they were very welcome. Like, he was pretty tart and dirty with his language when, you know, introducing his daughters, and everyone felt relatively like, okay, you know, he's gonna let this happen. And it just created a false sense of security that really changed the course of the battle between Robb Stark and Cersei and Joffrey Lannister. High Sparrow, I'm actually going to put as an A. Like it or not, he had a very strong power and ability. Actually, I'm going to put him as a B because he was kind of naive at the end. And that naivete cost him. He barred people from leaving that, you know, circular building, and he was just like, oh, things are fine, and that ended up having everyone killed because the building got blew up with wildfire. If instead he had been more socially savvy, he could have potentially avoided that once, especially when Marjorie noticed that. Once again, another credit to Marjorie's social ability. Marjorie noticed something was fishy and alerted the High Sparrow. But I'm putting him high as a B because if you saw season 6, this guy's ability, and season 5 technically, this guy's ability to use religion and God, very similar to Melisandre, to just shape, influence people. He got Tommen to convert over to basically renounce everything and let the High Sparrow control the kingdom in a way where he essentially, through Tommen, the High Sparrow was like, you know, I'm going to judge and punish Cersei and Marjorie however I please. And Tommen was so brainwashed that he was like, okay, even though at one point those were the two people he still loved most, and the High Sparrow was going to commit atrocities and punishments to them. So there was a point where through his power and his religious ability and his ability to influence, he had basically won over and toppled an entire kingdom in a way, and just had sheer control of everything, and essentially the whole system through Tommen, and then through capturing and keeping those as hostages and just relaying his will. I'm actually going to put this guy at a C for his general ability to just stay alive. I mean, he just was pretty honest. Like if you pay him enough money, he will be one of the best swordsmen you ever meet. He'll assassinate, kill, do whatever you want. And so by that value, which once again credit to Tyrion was able to notice that, understand that, and use that. He was able to stay in the game for a long time and flip between the sides and stay undercover even though he worked for Tyrion. He should have been executed or tortured or at least investigated and interrogated when Tyrion was suspected of killing Joffrey, but he just kind of stayed under the radar and never had a problem and survived the whole show. This is Daenerys's brother. Although he had high ambitions, I think he just, I think he played things rather poorly. I think he was smarter than some of these people, so I will give him some credit, but ultimately, he didn't understand the power dynamics, and so he just thought, if I trade in my sister, I'll get all these armies, and sure enough, instead, they just killed him. So it was a big mistake, a naive mistake, but it definitely happens. I'll put him as a D because he's not as bad as some of these other completely naive characters. He was at least trying. He had ambitions to become and get on the Iron Throne. They just did not play out well by any means. Oh, here he is again. Maybe this is a different guy. Tommen. Tommen's ability is probably, I'm going to put him as a C. He was kind, he was nice, he was open and willing to be wise, but he was naive, and that naivete cost him. He was influenced severely by the High Sparrow. He was too soft and unwilling and unable to assert himself when the Sparrows took away his wife and his mother. And because, as mentioned in the show, because of how soft he was, he ultimately ended up being so influenced by the Sparrows that he converted to their religion, and then ultimately was not emotionally stable enough to continue on and ended his life when they all got blown up. This is Renly Baratheon's dad. I'm actually going to put him as a C because he actually led a good house, played a good switcheroo with the whole Red Wedding kiln, and played the game well to an extent. But the big oversight was he got poisoned and betrayed by his own son. Clearly not seeing the signs, even though he constantly brought up to his son, "Oh, you're just a bastard. If I have a son, you're out of the way." Like, by not being socially preemptive and seeing the results and implications of that, even though it was constantly repeated in front of Renly, it cost him. Renly ended up dying, but you see his gameplay and his the longevity thinking he has, because there's a big scene with him and his son talking about how the Boltons were able to establish their strength and power through constantly extending their house name through marriages. So he had that ability to play the game, even to the point where he orchestrated the initial plan to marry Ramsay off to Sansa to further that Bolton line. But once again, like, really, how far can you go with that? And once again, I thought that was rather silly. You're going to try and, sure, it makes sense on paper to further the line by marrying off to one of the biggest names in the North, a Stark, but you're really going to force a marriage to someone who you just slaughtered a lot of their family members in a betrayal at a wedding? Like, something's going to come back to bite you. Like, you don't think that marriage is going to last long. Sansa at some point is going to seek revenge. So not really thinking that far ahead in that way. A silly proposition. Lancel Lannister, I think he was a puppet through and through. First through Cersei manipulating him, getting him to do his bidding. Then Tyrion found out that he was sleeping with Cersei, even though it was through Cersei's command. He used that as blackmail to make him into Tyrion's puppet and a leek and rat to monitor Cersei. And then he ended up becoming converted into a sparrow through religion and became the High Sparrow's puppet, ultimately being blown up. So not so good. Here's the guy I've been looking for, Tywin Lannister. I'm going to put him as an A. Tywin was potentially one of the greatest out of this list. His warfare, his tact, his ability to win so many wars, survive so many generations and dynasties. But at the same time, he made some mistakes. He was not flawless either. I think his sheer ability and honor and commitment to furthering the Lannister name after he's dead probably led to, why the Lannisters survived for so long. But by just constantly hammering that home and always forcing his will, it backfired many times. Cersei did not want Jaime to leave and live in Casterly Rock, but Tywin did. Tywin didn't want Jaime to be a Kingsguard because Kingsguard can't have children. He wanted to further that line. He wanted Tyrion to just go to the Night's Watch or die because he just had a disdain for dwarves. And a lot of his children resented him for it. Cersei hated him because she didn't want to be married off to a Tyrell. Jaime ultimately committed against his will, or not against his will, but against what he wanted, to move to Casterly Rock to save Tyrion from being executed, and he disliked Tywin for that. And then Tyrion himself really disliked Tywin for dozens and dozens of reasons, starting from his Tywin's pure hatred for him since birth, all the way to committing his own son to execution. And through all of that, by just not having any thought or consideration for that, and preemptively seeing the results of that, it ended in Tyrion being so bitter that he killed his own father. And even in that micro conversation, that final conversation they had together, Tywin was not socially tactful through that. He was very blunt and blatant, and by not, there were parts at the start of the conversation where he was thoughtful and careful with what he said. By being blunt towards the end and just referencing Shay as just this trash whore, Tyrion got hurt, and it ended up costing Tywin his life. So his social awareness and tact had room for improvement in the last scene, but I'm still ranking him so high because of his just general warfare and his age and wisdom and ability to keep essentially keep the Lannister dynasty going for so long. Almost at a close here. Let's see if I missed anyone. Robb Stark, I'm going to put at a C. I mean, he was a good leader. He won a lot of battles, great warfare, but honestly, I'm going to move this guy down because I don't think he should be higher than Robb. But yeah, Robb Stark, I just felt like nothing spectacular about Robb Stark. He was just this. He won a lot of battles, but then when he lost a large number of his army, then kind of like Stannis, he just kind of overcommitted and would not turn back, even though the numbers were clearly against him. Then he let his love of another woman affect a very important marriage that would have supported, strengthened, maybe secured his win. And I know nowadays, yeah, obviously you should pursue who you love and stuff, but once again, we're just measuring straight Game of Thrones gameplay ability, politics, alliances, and so forth. And so, a lot of started off very strong, a lot of bad moves led to not just his death, but the death of his pregnant wife, all sorts of horrors and stuff through that red wedding betrayal. So, it ended up costing him a lot. So I think he could have played the game better himself. Stannis Baratheon's wife, honestly, I'm going to put as an F. I mean, terrible story from beginning to end. I mean, just blind faith in a religion to a point where you're weeping with joy that your husband's cheating on you because you're deluded by this religion, and then ultimately, believing in the sacrifice and burning of your child, but then hanging yourself from the trauma afterwards. It's just like ridiculous. Technically, if anyone's to blame, it's the HBO writers for writing that. I mean, that's clearly not canon or related to the actual books, so maybe that was why it was so almost out of character or strange. So believe it or not, I think I'm going to put this guy who was the leader of the wildlings as B. Reason for that, I think he did a very great job. He united like 140 tribes, many of which who were fighting initially, kind of like Jon Snow, but on a more magnified level, where he said, hey, there's a greater problem at play. The Night King, the White Walkers are coming. And so Jon Snow united maybe the Night's Watch and the wildlings. He did that with 140 tribes to bring them all together, and then bring them like people who hate each other, the Thens and the Giants, and then bring them all together, bring them all to the wall. I thought he did a great job. He was kind, loyal, and even when he refused to bow down to Stannis, I understand why he did it. He knew the culture of the wildlings, and he knew if he bowed down, it would have looked very bad to the wildlings, and it would have affected things. So he did what he had to do. So I thought he did a pretty good job, got as far as he could. But could he have gotten farther? For sure, yeah, I think so. All right, I think that is everyone of real importance here. Let me see if there's anyone. I mean, I guess you can say the Hound, put him as a C. I mean, he served the Lannisters for a while, but then when the war started turning against him, he just fled. And then on his own, he was a pretty strong, fighter, but ultimately he ended up just being a drifter for the most part. Really strong in combat, but not as strong as some other people, and only a few people were stronger than him. And yeah, I mean, it really didn't lead to anything. Khal Drago, I would say I put him as a C. Once again, he didn't have much. He was there for such a short time. He had some ambition, but not huge amounts, and he probably would have just stayed the leader of his tribe, and that would have been that. And as far as social ability, social tact, didn't seem like he had much. This is a guy who that old guy who slept with a bunch of people. Yeah, old guy slept with a lot of young women, and ultimately, eventually got executed in season 6 because Cersei just thought he was uh, despicable. So this guy just felt like, somewhat bottom of the barrel. Like, he survived for a while just by being a maester and being pretty decent and loyal to Cersei, but really I think he didn't have that much social tact. He spoke out sometimes against Cersei and just voiced his own opinion at council meetings, even though it sometimes put him in a bad light or uh, made some enemies of him. He just spoke his mind, not a smart thing to do. And he was jealous of the other guy who wasn't even a maester in his eyes, and ultimately it cost him his life. People just wanted him out. Like, he couldn't be trusted. And he also was that little rat who would feed info to Cersei, and Tyrion rooted him out for it and threw him in jail. Let's see. For fun, we could throw in the Night King here. I put him as B, just in terms of sheer power and ability to gain that power through his superpower. But in terms of Game of Thrones, it's the full package: social attack, social ability, social strength. So I can't vote him higher there. I'm going to put her as a D. She really was such a minor character, really didn't really impact much, wasn't there for any of the social intelligence, Game of Thrones, warfare scenes, other than, to support Robb in whatever decision he made. If anything, she was the foil to Robb Stark, costing him the war, costing him Walder Frey support, and that Red Wedding disaster. By the way, fun fact, the actress who played her is the grandchild of Charlie Chaplin, the famous black and white film actor. So I think that basically does it. That's all the characters that really matter here in terms of just general strength of gameplay, uh, strong ability. Just for fun, I'm gonna throw in some random ones at the end here. The wolf I'll throw in as a D. Same with this wolf. We also have Ed Sheeran here. I'll put him as an F. The giant, put him as a D. This Tyrell guy, put him as an F. Like, he really was just a simp. Didn't really do much. Just said yes, yes, yes. Hi, Sparrow. Make it stop. Marcella, non-player. She was actually pretty decent. She exerted some strength on Cersei, so I'll put her as a C. Translator of Daenerys, I'll put her as a D. She really didn't do much other than translate. Grey Worm, same. The dragon, put as a C in terms of strength, maybe B. He had some good moments, put him there. Rickon Stark, put him as an F. These people that helped Bran out, I put him as a C. This guy, put him as a C, kind of helpful towards the end, saved Bran. This guy kind of helped Jon Snow, so I'll put him there. And the little wolf. Shay was terrible, like clear lack of social sense. put this guy as a D, like not terrible, but was able to escape. She was just a side character. C. Davos had some good moments. He was pretty charismatic and persuasive. Another dragon, and put him here. Okay, I think this is the final list. I've added all these random characters in. So ultimately, here you go. This is the final list. Take it as you will. Ta-da! Thanks for watching. Hope that was entertaining.